Well, good morning and welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're with David and Beth Booram, and I'm Juanita Rasmus, a new friend of David and Beth's. We had an opportunity to meet, about a year, maybe two ago?
Probably a couple of years ago.
About 2 years ago. Gathering. That's right, at the Apprentice Gathering in Kansas City, Kansas. Is it in Kansas?
In Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas. Yeah. Okay, Wichita. Sorry
we were there,
about that.
right?
That's right, exactly. So that was a beautiful connection, thanks to James Bryan Smith and the Renovare Ministry. And so we have a chance to be together this morning, and we're excited about sharing with you the wonderful new work that David and Beth have come together to produce. It's a glorious book, and it is called When Faith Becomes Sight. So let me ask you, what made you choose that as a title?
Well, it was not an easy process because we had a totally different title when we began.
Okay.
And decided that it wasn't quite right for the book. And so we went back and forth a number of times, and finally, I think David might have suggested this, and I sat with it, and it just felt right for me. I think the way we understand the title is that it is faith that is what encourages us to be on the lookout for God. And as we begin to look for God and recognize the presence of God, then our faith becomes sight.
Oh, beautiful.
So it is sighted.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah.
So what do you think motivated you to shift the change in the title?
Our publisher.
Oh, that's always helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
We could name names right now, but we
exactly.
won't.
To have assistance in the process. And who is your
Yeah.
publisher? Who
it's
is publisher?
InterVarsity.
Great,
Yeah.
wonderful.
And so it's one of those kind of dances of trust
Yes.
and having kind of our own sensibilities.
Sure.
And so, yeah, the original title was On the Lookout for God.
Oh, wow.
And again, it was that concept of being a person who is looking.
Sure.
Of wanting to see God more fully in one's ordinary life.
Right. Well, as spiritual directors, you guys get an opportunity to help people along the journey and to help them really, I don't know if you so much help or, I think of what spiritual directors do as when you go to the ophthalmologist, they put that big machine in front of you and they keep turning the knobs to help you tune in, and then they say, now is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? And what I see the two of you do is to walk alongside with people, and then you help them say, now is that a little clearer? No, that's not better. Okay, well, let's try this. Is this a little clearer? And the spiritual practices give us an opportunity to do that, don't they?
They really do.
So tell us how you saw that happening as you were writing When Faith Becomes Sight.
I think it sort of came together as we were thinking about this book that would help provide our readers with often what we do provide individuals we meet with for spiritual direction, help honing the skills of how to recognize God and then reflect on that recognition and respond to God's invitations. And so as we worked on the structure, we realized that there were 3 vantage points we wanted to give people. The first would be, what do you look for? And that vantage point is part 1 of the book, and it's kind of looking out a little more externally to experiences that we have, like transcendent moments, or noticing this recurring theme throughout our life. The second part is what we look through, and we named some lenses that we look through that can either help us see more clearly, see God more clearly, or sometimes even distort the way we see God. Like we talk about your God image and how that affects the way you recognize or don't recognize God. And then the last section is how we look within, which is sometimes for some people a very difficult and mysterious and even uncomfortable vantage point. And yet we describe the different sensations that we have when we are beginning to notice the presence and action of God within us. So I think that's how we saw the book coming together, and us being able to offer, in many ways, the people who read this book an opportunity to receive what we offer individuals in spiritual direction.
Yeah, and I see that throughout the book. David, the very first part of the book, Beth was saying, it's about kind of looking out.
Mhm.
Give us some highlights about that looking out experience and being able to see God out there. How do you walk alongside in the book with people to help give them a little better clarity on the vision on looking out?
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the hopes of the book is that we'd expand our lenses to see more broadly that God is at work all around us. We lack maybe the eyes, the imagination to see. And so our hope would be to, like I said, maybe increase the number of channels. I was thinking about this morning. You're younger than us, but maybe you're old enough where it's like you would turn on the TV and you'd have 4 channels.
Yes.
And one would be fuzzy.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And then you go on vacation, and then there would be this thing called cable TV.
Come on now.
And there would be like
Which we've never
1,000
had.
That's
channels.
right. That's
okay?
right. That's right.
Well, I think in some ways that's what we're trying to do here. Is there's almost an infinite number of channels by which God can engage with us. And I was just talking to someone Tuesday, and he shared this story that he had always kind of been into the stars a little bit. But 3 years ago, someone gave him a telescope. And he found himself, he would go out and he would set it up and he would look, and the first time he did, he saw Jupiter and 3 moons. And he was just captivated. He goes out every night now and looks up in the sky and is drawn to wonder and gratitude and worship. It's become a spiritual practice.
Absolutely.
And it's his spiritual practice.
Yes.
It's not that he's been told that this is how you need to develop your
Yes.
relationship with God or enter into being seen by God. And so again, I think what we're trying to do is open the frame.
Sure. And that's such a beautiful example. You talked about distortions, how there are these distortions that happen. And so as you look into that camera and at the folks who are joining us today, talk to them about some of the distortions that you've seen as a spiritual director and that you highlighted in the book.
Yeah, I think how we, well, a friend of ours put it this when we include this quote in the book, how we think about God is our theology, but how we imagine God thinks and feels about us is the relationship. So we're helping people notice how they imagine God feeling and thinking about them. And when they have the sense that God, for instance, is disapproving or has a stern countenance and is always experiencing them in a way that says, I'm disappointed, that can alert us that we have a distorted God image that we need to pay attention to and invite the true nature of God into our own lived experience and allow the love of God to really heal us. So that would be one way that we begin to notice those distortions. It's just how we imagine, even in prayer or even as God comes to mind, how do I imagine God thinking and feeling about me?
It's a pretty powerful point. You know, Anne Lamott has this quote that's fairly popular, and it basically says, if you find out that God hates the same people you do, then there might be a problem with the God that you're envisioning.
Funny how
Right.
that happens.
You
isn't it?
know, exactly. You know, so yeah, those distortions, they can really get in our way.
Yes.
In the way of our being able to see outward. And then you said the second part of the book was about being able to. We go outward at first, and then what was the second part of the book?
The second part is the lenses, the unconscious and conscious lenses that we can use to see God more clearly in Scripture and using our imagination and nature, some of the lenses we can actually choose, and then we have some unconscious ones like our God image, and another chapter is on our assumptions and expectations of God. That are almost like the operating system of our faith, and we're not aware that sometimes we have these expectations or assumptions that are causing us to see God and the way God does God's work in the world in a distorted manner.
Sure.
Until they don't work.
Until they don't work.
Now, so talk about that until they don't work part.
Yeah.
You know, tell us more about that.
Yeah.
How do we know when they're not working?
Yeah. I think there's dissonance There's dissonance between what we have been taught to believe and our lived experience. And often we're told, well, just keep believing what you've been taught to believe and don't think for yourself. Don't pray your way into this. Don't question. Don't feel. And so I think it's granting one another permission to struggle, to at times almost feel like you're losing your faith.
Yeah.
We talk about
Yeah.
that some,
Yeah.
that sometimes you can feel like, what's happening to me?
Right.
Because my beliefs and life are colliding. And inviting God into I don't know if it's the mystery, I don't know if it's the paradox, or it could just be we're continually upgrading how we see. Again, coming back to this, we see in a mirror dimly.
That's right.
And so are we in a transformational process of continually having life and the Spirit upgrade our way of seeing?
Yeah. You know, something that you said that was really so just crystal clear when you talked about the gentleman who got the telescope. He had already had this kind of sense about the stars, kind of an inkling, you know, and then he got a telescope.
Yeah.
And then it really manifested for him that this is a practice that's a spiritual practice for me. Can you talk to us a little more about that? What I'm talking about is so often those of us who've been raised with the spiritual practices as being very concrete, worship, prayer, fasting, silence and solitude. There's no space in there that talks about using telescopes, you know, but yet and still God is very present to the artist who's mixing paint, present to the potter, pushing the dough, the clay. I was thinking about a baker too, pushing that cake dough or cookie dough or whatever, you know, the bread dough, exactly. You know, God present to us when we're trying to figure out an algorithm for a program we're writing. Or can you talk to us about some of the ways that have been out of the ordinary? You know, the ways that St. Francis wouldn't have known to talk to us about, or Saint Teresa wouldn't have known to talk to us about, or Augustine might not have even talked to us about. What practices have you seen coming up as you're working with clients that you're doing spiritual direction with, that you're saying, wow, this is the space where this person meets God?
Some come to mind?
Well, I'm thinking so the third part of the book is about looking within, and one of the chapters is on paying attention to our desires.
Thank you. That's
So you know, we say in spiritual direction that anytime we recognize a deep and true desire, that we should pay attention to that, because often it is God stirring those desires. So even with the example that David used of his directee who's had this attraction to look at the stars, we would recognize God in that for him.
Yes.
So anytime we have this attraction toward things that are wholesome and good, and yet maybe very non-traditional in the sense that they're not reading the Bible and praying and worshiping and fasting and so on, that we would say, pay attention to that. And so we do have directees who have many different things that seem to call their name and that they are giving themselves to, that are really a work of God in them and an invitation from God to them.
You know, I'm so glad that that you're inviting people, as you said, to pay attention to the things that seem to be calling you. Because I've found in my own life that often things that are calling me have been calling me all of my life. And then at points, maybe I squunch them down. Is that a good word? I pressed them down because there were other competing loyalties, voices, commands, demands. And so it became I'm an adult. I shouldn't be thinking about blowing bubbles as this place where I really connect with my imagination and thus connect with God. And so bubbles get pushed aside, or whatever the thing is that a person may have been doing, that at some point they feel like it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
It's not appropriate. And when I say appropriate, I don't mean appropriate as in irresponsible, immoral. I mean inappropriate as that no one's named it as being viable.
That's right.
It's-
Yeah.
We're so serious.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you talk about blowing bubbles.
Come
I
on
mean,
now.
I think there's a creative aspect often to this.
Yes.
And I know that's part of your
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
calling.
Yeah.
I think there's a curiosity too. It is nurturing curiosity.
Yeah.
And there's probably a courage that comes with that as well. You've got to kind of, again, get outside of your normal or what you've been told. Some of it's really letting go of those voices that tell you how you are to develop your relationship with God and experiencing God's kind of invitation. I like that about, I think there can be a return.
Yes.
There's a returning to those
Yeah.
first places, those
Sure.
first loves.
Yes.
Those places that just brought delight.
Exactly.
I'm a better person.
And that
when
word
I'm giving
delight.
myself.
We don't talk enough about that in Christian circles. Delight.
Delight.
Pure delight.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
That those things, I remember I experienced a major depressive episode, and I'm writing about that now. And I remember one of the things that gave me great delight as a kid. Well, actually, in the process of seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist and doing all the things that appear to be the things to do to help me gain my mental health, one of the things that was happening is I was experiencing God speaking real clearly to me about things like, what did you like to do when you were a little girl?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, when the question was asked, I couldn't remember because my brain was just so shut down. But one of the things that came to me was how much I used to like to jump off of my grandmother's porch, because she had a porch that you had to go up to, I think about 3 or 4 steps. And then she had those little, I call them pillars on the side of the steps. I think y'all have
Yeah.
them up
Yeah,
there.
we do.
All right, so I might jump on
I
it
know.
before
I
I
was gonna
leave,
say,
okay?
we can have a little-
We will take this
Exactly,
out.
and catch me jumping, all right? And I remember how much delight I felt when I would jump off of that. That delight became jumping out of trees, and then my grandmother seeing me and saying, don't do that.
Don't
You're
do
going to
that.
fall and break your neck, right? So what about the places that gave us delight, but that caused other people anxiety and fear?
Yeah.
How do we give ourselves permission to go there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we become bored with the old ways.
Sure.
They just don't work anymore.
Yeah.
We're made for more.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
They're just like the leaves are right now, turning colors, and they're becoming something different. They've never been, even though those trees are maybe 35, 40, 50, maybe older years old, they've never been the tree they are right
That's
now.
right.
That's right.
They've
Yeah.
never been the tree having this experience right now. And the same with us.
Yeah.
And you're bringing up a point too, that those voices inside us that stay with us,
Yes.
that say, don't do that, you're going to break your neck. Sometimes we have to actually confront those voices and say, thank you very much for trying to protect me, but I don't need you to do that anymore. And you have to start embracing your own life
That's beautiful.
and the ways in which God is drawing you
Exactly.
to expand and try new things and be curious.
Sure. You said curious, wonder, and
Creative.
creative.
I didn't think of 3 C's, but they just came out. Creative
And
and courageous.
courageous,
Yes.
yeah, it does take.
And
all
those
three.
are important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, as you were speaking, David, I was thinking how the scripture says, unless we become as little children.
Yeah.
Because children are creative, they're curious,
Yeah.
and you know they are courageous.
Yeah.
How often have you seen a kid reach for something? You say, no, honey, that's hot.
Yeah.
You know, their curiosity was taking them beyond any limitations. And I think so much of what you're doing in your book is inviting us to re-engage the wonder. At the end of the chapter, give me one example from one of your chapters that you can recall that was an exercise that kind of helped us stir up the wonder. Can you think of one off the top?
I'm thinking about a chapter on recurring themes and symbols, because we feel like That's a very non-traditional spiritual practice or invitation to pay attention to,
Sure.
and yet often it's those recurring themes and symbols that become deeply meaningful, and they're ways in which we see God showing up in our ordinary life spontaneously, unprovoked. And so at the end of the chapter, I remember thinking, and I've probably done this for myself with some of those themes and symbols, but encouraging people to actually acquire something that represents that symbol.
Oh, wow.
You know, if you look around this room, you're going to see a lot of things about birds.
Mm-hmm.
Birds are really significant in our life.
Mm-hmm.
We're bird watchers. I have a particular bird that is a God sign for me,
Okay.
a blue heron.
Okay.
So actually placing those kinds of
That's
symbols in your home to remind you of that theme in your life.
It gave me chills.
I even recommended,
Yeah.
like, you could even get a tattoo, or you
Sure.
could.
Oh, wait,
you
hold
could
up. Did a Christian spiritual director just say get a tattoo? Oh my God. Thank you for affirming, because I've been thinking about getting a tattoo. Thank you.
Fun. What are you going to get?
The word breathe.
Oh.
And I'm going to get it right here so I'll see it to remind me to breathe.
That's
I
wonderful.
love that.
Yeah, but I love that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about, is seeing the invitation of God as being these very non-traditional. You know, we sometimes leave God back in the golden ages, and God is transcendent and very present and willing to roll with us right on into the 21st and 22nd century, you know? And so
Absolutely.
this idea of a tattoo, having these reminders around,
Yeah.
powerful message.
Mm.
So what encouraged you guys to write this book? What moved you in that way? Besides the publisher, we know something about Cindy Bunch and her tenacity at finding great human beings with great stories and great insight. And so beyond Cindy.
We were talking about this last night, and the book is what I think we aspire to be and how we aspire to live. And maybe all authors write better than they live. And so I think it's from the fruit of 40 plus years of walking this spiritual journey, of what we have found as what's worth keeping on to and pressing into.
Yes.
I told a friend, maybe it's the book I wished I could have given to my younger self.
Yes.
That what I know now, if I were to give my younger self the things I know now, what would they be? And so I hope it's just harvesting those kind of the fruit of our journey up to this point of trying to be increasingly real and authentic, and I would say wondrously experiencing the love of God in increasing freedom.
Yes.
No.
That the journey's not ended. It just feels like we're almost halfway there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So why now? Why is this the right time for this book? What do you see maybe happening in the world? What do you sense with your directees? You know, as you speak at conferences, what is it that seems to say that this is the time? And it might be something real simple, like Cindy said, it's time, all right? But what is it? Because I know that there are other writers out there who are listening to us today, and maybe they're wondering, is this the time for this book? Maybe they're, you know, I remember thinking to myself, there's so many people who've written on the topic that I'm writing on. What difference will my book make? So what makes this, you know, what makes this seem to be right for you now?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I'll relate it to something we heard on the news a couple of nights ago. They were interviewing, I think, a physicist who was in almost an exasperated tone saying, we really only know about 10% of all there is to know about our universe. And yet what we do know is becoming increasingly sophisticated and complex and mind-blowing and mind-bending. And my sense is that as we become more and more aware of a larger and more complex world, some of the ways we have thought about God simply seem so inadequate and small and parochial and
Yes.
provincial. And so there's a quote that we share in the book that basically says that we are living in an era of unbelief, even among believers.
Yeah.
People cannot grasp that God is both beyond all that we know of this complex universe in which we live, but also intimate and deeply involved in my life.
Yes.
And so we hope and pray and long for this book to meet people right where they are and help them realize the ways in which God is weaving God's self within their life and their story, and at the same time holding all of this together.
Yes, yes, that's good.
Juanita, I think as well, we're all about training spiritual directors here and offering spiritual direction. It's Fall Creek Abbey. And David Benner says that spiritual direction may be the crown jewel of the Christian ministry.
Yeah.
And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we have not been exposed
Right,
to this way
Right.
of being companioned,
right.
of assisted most of our adult life.
Exactly.
And then we experience firsthand some of the fruit and the value of having someone help us pay attention to our lives.
Exactly.
And so I think why now is we're a bit in, I don't know, early midstream of, I think, more and more people discovering or being curious about this ministry of spiritual direction. And not all of us need to or will meet with a spiritual director.
Right.
But in book form, can we be assisted
Exactly.
to look
Sure.
at our lives
Sure.
in some of those ways that maybe a spiritual director might be able to help one with?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go on.
And just to be clear, one of the ways that we introduce the reader to spiritual direction is in every chapter, as you know, because you've read the manuscript and wrote a beautiful endorsement for it. Every chapter has a story from a spiritual direction session. And so it's illustrative of spiritual direction and of how God does God's work within us.
Exactly. And I think that was a really beautiful thing you did, was to let each of the chapters represent an actual experience with someone, because it's a doorway, it's an entry in point, and it makes it easy to enter in, especially when we're being a little nosy, entering in on somebody else's story,
I think
and then
you're right.
we end up finding, wow, there's parallels
Yeah.
in what's going
I'm not
on
the
in my
only
life,
one.
and I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I thought
How
something was wrong
often-
with me.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I thought it was just me. And you know what I think you all do really well is you help people name experiences. Naming is so important. When we, I remember the fact that my, I'm aware that my mother grew up in a very different era. When she was having a baby, you went to the doctor checked you, make sure you were all right, but didn't teach you anything, didn't inform you about anything. Now, then when I came along and had a baby, I go to my doctor, the doctor is giving me little pamphlets. You're 3 months pregnant, expect this. And you're going, oh, I'm being coached, I'm being guided. And what you all are doing is giving language to this process, coaching and guiding, where so many of us grew up without any real guidance, no real instruction about what's growing deeply within you. It was often always just so much the kind of surfacey outside stuff. Show up for worship, show up for communion, show up for the spiritual experience of community. But what about what's happening inside of me? And that's what, when faith becomes sight, does, is it empowers you to have language for what's going on inside of you. And you get to be nosy. And we always pay more attention when we're overhearing a conversation at the table next to us. So we want you to pick this book up. It's going to be out when?
It releases officially November 19th.
So get ready, get ready, get ready. November the 19th. Matter of fact, there should be some kind of coming out party around
Yes.
November 19th, you know? Begin now to just begin to think about what it might be like to experience what David and Beth have been sharing with us today. When you get your copy of When Faith Becomes Sight, being published by InterVarsity Press, I don't think there's a finer spiritual formation publisher out there right now. I think I'm a bit biased, but I think they've got a really beautiful array. And I love the subtitle, Opening Your Eyes to God's Presence All Around You. So if I had a remaining question, it might be, what are your hopes and dreams for When Faith Becomes Sight? What would you hope for this book? What would you, I'm going to ask you, what would you hope for the book? What would you hope for the audience?
Oh, okay. Well, I would hope a lot of things for the book. I'll just name them maybe in a few short sentences. I would hope that this book finds its way into some spiritual direction and spiritual formation programs as part of the curriculum.
Oh, that'd be beautiful.
I would hope that this book finds its way into the hands of people who are at a crossroads in their faith. Maybe in that kind of what we often call deconstruction, where they're just not sure what they believe anymore, or perhaps for people who would describe their spiritual life right now as a place in the desert or in the darkness, and they're groping, trying to figure out how they can identify whether God has truly left them. So getting it into the hands of the right people is really important to us, and so we're praying that in a way that's only something God can do.
Absolutely.
But that's what we're praying will happen.
Yeah. So she said, get it, that's a great transition sentence, getting it into the hands of the right people now. All right. So what are your hopes for the people who receive a copy of When Faith Becomes Sight?
Yeah. This is going to sound so simple, but I think clearing all of the specifics and of the chapters and these unique ways, 1,000 channels on the cable TV that we can experience God.
Yeah.
And I think the main thrust that I'd want is that we all would enter into being able to receive kind of the early fruit of our union with the love of God. That if it doesn't lead us and one another to receive the bucket full of love that we all need, that we need to be humble enough to acknowledge that we maybe increasingly need the older we get.
I think you're right.
But I would love for people to say, I really, I experience God's love more personally because of this book. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. No, I don't know how you guys tend to end a spiritual direction session with a client. But we've got some people who've been hanging in here with us and sharing this time with us. What would you like to leave them with? How would you like to close our time together?
One of the questions that we often end with is, what will you take with you? And so maybe that's how I would end our time is, you've listened to us banter a little bit. You've met our beautiful friend Juanita.
And thank you, Juanita.
Thank you, my pleasure.
But if there's been something that has kind of lifted up for you, that stood out, that you're still finding kind of lingering in the periphery of your mind, recognize that as perhaps an invitation or a gift, and take some time to reflect on what that is.
I'm not going to improve on that.
Okay, so that was great. How could you improve? Hey, look, while you're reflecting, I want to invite you to visit Fall Creek Abbey's website at www.fall, F-A-L-L, Creek, C-R-E-E-K, Abbey, A-B-B-E-Y.org. fallcreekabbey.org. I don't know if you can see that or not. But look, there's some wonderful insight there. There's some we'll say some little jewels to help you hold on to November the 19th when the book comes out. And then we want to make sure you remember to go on and pre-order. I think they can pre-order now, right?
Sure.
And if you'll pre-order now and you'll use the promo code OFFER20W, you'll you'll get a 30% saving on your investment. I don't know of a better way to invest. What is the cost of the book? Do you remember? Whatever it is.
I think it's 17, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
And that would be at the InterVarsity Press website.
That's at the
Yeah.
InterVarsity Press website. Thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Right.
But I don't know, what can you do? Let's just say it's $20, okay? $20 is about a decent lunch, really, when you talk about how much you'd spend in time to go get that lunch and maybe prepare that lunch, and it might be about a $20 investment. And a lunch will last you until the next meal. But this book could last you a lifetime and empower you as you seek to have an experience of recognizing God's presence and clarifying your vision as your faith becomes sight. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
We appreciate you being
Thank
with
you,
us.
Juanita.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure. It's always good to be with you too.
Mhm.
God bless you.
Yeah.
Make it a great day.